Hello everyone and welcome back to PASSTHEauxCORD. Welcome back to another 2024 list. We're going through the best songs of the year this time around. We did worst songs. Also did podcast episodes already. Those are out on the worst and best music of the year. So if you want to go check those out in a little bit of a different format, that's available to you as well. But today we're doing a top 50 best songs of the year. Couple of things before we get into it. There was so much good music that came out this year. I didn't hear all of it. I guess, of course, that's going to be the case. There's so much music out there, but I feel like I probably missed out on a pretty prominent thing or two. If there's some stuff that I should have known about, make sure to comment it down below. I would be happy to go listen to it. Kept it to one song per artist. I believe that goes for features as well. We're gonna go ahead and get into it with a couple of honorable mentions. Just two this time, just two honorable mentions. The first one we got here is Puzzle Teeth, The Boy Who Cried Allergies. I have no idea where to rank a noise project. I really don't. It's like kind of something adjacent to music that isn't fully comparable to other music. Puzzle Teeth put out a great noise project earlier this year, though, that we reviewed on the podcast. It's really cool. Go check it out if you're into industrial, really crazy experimental type stuff. And my other honorable mention goes to 90 Days by Aries. This one is actually a kind of disqualified mention, and that's why it doesn't get onto the list. He put out a deluxe of Welcome Home this year. One of the two songs that was included in the wider release of this deluxe edition was 90 Days. It's technically not a new song because it's been tossed around for ages in snippet forms and just kind of some unreleased stuff. It's existed for a while is what I'm saying. It's got an official release now. But now let's go ahead and get into the list. For our top 20, I'm going to be including a clip of each song so you can hear a few seconds of how they sound. But that would be a lot and probably a lot of back and forth for the entire list. So we're just gonna bust through these first 30 here as quickly as possible. Probably not going to have as much to say just so we're not here all day, but my first pick on the list is probably my stupidest pick on the list, probably my weirdest, hottest take. I've got Future and Metro Boomin' Came to the Party. I'm living my truth with this one. It's my wasted at 2 a.m. truth, but my truth nonetheless, okay? Give me a break. I understand nobody gave a shit about this one, but you know what? I keep coming back to it. It feels like it's revitalizing that monster era Metro Boomin' Future collab energy. And this one's catchy. It's one that I just kept itching to come back to. There's a lot of great picks that you could do across the two different We Don't Trust You albums. Obviously, Like That is the better choice. Again, trying to keep it to one per artist. So that's a bit of a long-winded thing already, but I also want to say that I wanted to include this one so that someone can hopefully tell me I'm not crazy. I'm having a personal Mandela effect thing here. I swear this song used to be called Photos. I have it in my head that the song was called Photos, which would make sense given the chorus of the song. Please someone tell me I'm not crazy and say that song used to be called Photos instead of Came to the Party. Moving on to number 49, Heavy as the Crown by Linkin Park. Linkin Park's comeback is one that I sit on the fence with, as opposed to the very polarizing discussion on it. My experience with it, the new album that they put out with new lead singer Emily Armstrong had very high highs and low lows. Easily one of the highest highs on the album was Heavy as the Crown, however, really reminding me of what made Linkin Park great in the first place. Number 48, I've got Hiatus Coyote with Make Friends. While Hiatus Coyote's latest here didn't end up being one of my favorite overall top favorites of the year, I almost have to feel bad. The whole thing is just so sweet, uplifting, and heartwarming. And Make Friends is probably the most prominent standout across the whole album. Shout out to Long Cat, though, as an owner of an unreasonably long cat. I almost had to put it here. At number 47, we have The Dare with Perfume. The Dare was almost as polarizing as Linkin Park was this year, and I'm pretty far on the positive side of the discussion. Absolute banger that is this song. makes it pretty easy to be as far as I'm concerned. At number 48, we have Biba Doobie with Take a Bite. Heavily sampling Drive by Incubus isn't something that I expected from an indie pop artist, but the results are shockingly effective and very catchy, making for a great song. At number 45, we have Breathe by Yeat. Yeat had a crazy impressive jump in quality with his album 2093 this year, and Breathe is one of the biggest reasons why that album worked. It balances out his quirked up cloud rap aesthetics with a more catchy and dancey sound, resulting in a huge banger fit for driving far too fast to. Number 44, we have Eric DOA with Last June. I'm shocked with how low this song ended up on my list, but this year was just so stacked. Pop rap and this style of music in general tends to be a little bit of a cheat code for me. I've mentioned that in the past. And Last June was one of the best examples I heard all year. It's a very catchy one with an emotional edge to it that I just kept coming back to. And it plays into his hyperpop fusion in a really nice way. Number 43, we have Chief Keef with 1, 2, 3. It's been a second since we've gotten anything too impressive from Chief Keef, but this long-awaited and long-delayed Almighty So album managed to more or less live up to the anticipation. It's full of his biggest bangers since some of his earliest days, and 1, 2, 3 just happens to be my favorite among them. At number 42, we have Your Arms Are My Cocoon with Houston. Your Arms Are My Cocoon has a sound that takes some serious warming up to, a pretty high barrier for entry as well. That being said, I warmed up to it pretty quickly, and Houston was probably the most impressive and emotionally dense song among their entire debut album. Number 41 brings us Brittany Howard's Red Flags. When I think anything funk or soul in 2024, I think of Brittany Howard. And while the competition was stiff for the songs that she came out with this year, I find this one to be the most fun and replayable. At number 40, we have Parannoul with Evoke Me. Korean shoegaze artist Parannoul's come up has been a bit of an unexpected one, but one certainly well deserving. This 14-minute masterpiece of a centerpiece on their latest work is uplifting, ethereal, and nostalgic in a certain way that is wild and specific. It's a long listen, but it's one that easily justifies its runtime. Number 39, we have Oxygen Destroyer, Thy Name is Legion. This year had some of the highest highs I've heard in metal in a long time, in a lot of years. And in thrash and death metal, Oxygen Destroyer was easily one of the best bands to do it. This whole album felt boundary pushing and hard hitting. I have fun coming back to the whole thing, but Thy Name is Legion is the one I have the most fun coming back to. Number 38, Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds with Conversion. Wild God is definitely an album better listened to as a whole piece, which is a factor that made me exclude a couple of songs entirely from this list that may feel like they're a noticeable gap where there shouldn't be one. This one in particular just stood out from the rest of the album in a way where I had to include it here. It's a particularly majestic and conceptually deep track. I couldn't bring myself to skip it. Number 37 is Set It by Denzel Curry featuring Maxo Cream. Out of any tracks that land on this list, this is the one to land the highest, just for being a big, hard-hitting, heavy, enormous banger that's just fun to come back to. It's not that deep. There's nothing deep about it. It's just a really fun song to play. Of course, there were various ones I could have chosen from Denzel Curry's latest project. This one stood out just a tiny bit above the competition for me, and I came back to it more. Number 36 brings us Blood Incantation with The Stargate Tablet 3. Their latest ambitious work consisted of 6 marvelous, transcendent, spacey odysseys. They're all very impressive, especially when electronic elements get incorporated in, but I was most excited by the start of the second half of the album with this song. Number 35, I had to pick Blue by Billie Eilish. Pop is another genre that had a particularly good and notable year. Billie Eilish is one of the biggest reasons why. Blue sees Billie Eilish at her best, being a track that's pretty unique in execution. We've gotten some great stuff from her in the past, but some of these deeper cuts on this latest record just totally blow her previous releases out of the water, and Blue is maybe my favorite song from her now. Number 34, we have Joey Valence and Bray John Cena. Joey Valence and Bray's work can pretty easily be boiled down to Beastie Boys revivalism, but it's revivalism done right. There's also clearly a lot of their own personalities that goes into it. At number 33, we have Auric Echo's Ballad of Malcolm. Auric Echoes is one of the more underground artists we covered on the podcast this year, and maybe the most underground artist on this list. Listening to this song in particular, you would never know that's the case. Ballad of Malcolm is an intense, immersive, and thoroughly impressive experimental rock track that rivals some of the most legendary in the modern era, making music somewhat adjacent to it. It's another that fits better in the context of the album, but it's one of the most conceptually rich tracks on the album that serves as a solid standout. At number 32, we have Lupe Fiasco Mumble Rap. In a classic and straightforward lyrical sense, Lupe Fiasco is clearly one of the best out and doing it right now. There's no better track to look at than Mumble Rap if you want to see him at his best with storytelling, and this has a classic boom bap style beat to match perfectly. Next up at number 31, we have Kamasi Washington Computer Love. Kamasi balances out classic, immediately lovable forms of jazz with an experimental and ambitious edge, and Computer Love is the song I thought best represented his ambition. His instrumental work on the track is absolutely fantastic, and the 3 vocal features on here live up to the task perfectly and execute the concept. At number 30, we have Porter Robinson, Is There Really No Happiness? Russian Roulette or Cheerleader probably feel like the obvious picks when it comes to songs from his latest album, Smile, but I had to go with a deeper cut that just resonates with me more deeply. I had the amazing opportunity to see him live this year, and while the whole show was pretty incredible, this song in particular managed to hit even harder than the rest during that show. That's not to say that it doesn't hit hard on its own though, because the production style paired with the writing here strikes as perfectly executed on every listen. Number 29, we're going with Trans Upper Egypt, Italy. I understand there's some pretty off the beaten path picks on this list, but Trans Upper Egypt might be the strongest act that you could describe that way. I absolutely love them for that. The crazy, absolutely cooked vocals on this, the slick jazz influence, and the mind-bending art rock influence makes for the most cursed vibes that you just can't find anywhere else. Number 28, The Smile, Bending Hectic. Radiohead hasn't come back yet, but we almost have them here with The Smile, and this was the first of 2 projects they put out this year, and I happen to be much more impressed with the first one, and out of the songs there, I was easily the most impressed with Bending Hectic. That's because this song is trippy, entrancing, instrumentally impressive, packs a very heavy emotional punch as well, with some heavy content in the sentiment of it and kind of the narrative that goes on throughout the whole thing. At number 27, Turnabout, Luctus Main. Turnabout unexpectedly split off from the Haunted Mound collective he came up as a part of, and it proved to be a shockingly good move for him. His artistic trajectory under the Haunted Mound label and kind of group collective was a little bit lackluster, and this year he's completely turned this around, and the best song he's done that with is Luctus Main, the first independent track from him. It combines familiar Witch House production with a heavier metal influence, and it's heavier than anything Haunted Mound put out as of yet, even to this day, under any artist, I think. And it has some very passionate, intense scream vocals that I don't think anybody knew he had in him. At number 26, we have Aller himself, Junkrat. He is an underground rapper whose debut is immediately proving he's beyond worthy of eventually becoming one of the biggest lyrical, conscious rappers out doing it now. His storytelling ability, great flow, and dusty, vintage but impactful production choice on this track will show you exactly why I believe that to be the case. At number 25, Death's Dynamic Shroud and Galen Tipton, Herobrine Shell 2049. That was a bit of a mouthful. DDS has proven to be easily the most impressive act to originally arise from the vaporwave scene in its biggest days, and one of the most steadily prolific as well because of their monthly mixtape club. To have this impressive of a track on what's not even a mainline album is absolutely mind-blowing. While I'm not sure who worked more on it, both Galen Tipton and the band's own Keith Rankin were credited, so one of them did amazing work, if not just both of them contributing equal amounts here. Number 24, I have Blade and Young Lean, I Don't Like People. Hot take here, but I honestly think 2024 was Blade's best year ever. And he brought Young Lean right up there with him. This song is among an entire 30 that see him combining rage into his mystical cloud rap aesthetic, and I Don't Like People managed to be the best of the nihilistic bangers you can find on this track list. Number 23 sees us with Malneezy, To Cause Harm, the title track, I believe, from his latest album here. Spoiler, but this is my favorite electronic song to come out this year. And it comes from an independent artist who's a fellow Album of the Year user. With this abrasive, aggressive, downright frightening electro-industrial track, Malneezy just went way harder than he even needed to. At number 22, we have Lineker, pop star, Brazilian R&B singer and songwriter. Lineker is someone pretty new to me personally, but a staple in the popular music of Brazil, and this song does a great job at showing off why that is. Her vocals on the track are so smooth and elegant, laying down lines that are both catchy and theatrical. The song's instrumentation is just absolutely fantastic sounding beyond her performance as well. It's got some of the best bass usage I've heard in poppier and more popular music in general. The bass is so underutilized in this type of music, and it is certainly utilized in this one. At number 21, we got Maruha, The Invisible Man. Despite having only EPs out thus far, Maruha is already heavily discussed and respected within the online music space, and more becoming respected even outside of it. I know they've been playing some pretty crazy shows I've seen some videos of. The blend of jazz-infused post-rock they're working with is somewhat of a familiar one, but more so on this song than ever. They're showing they have their own twist on it. They've got their own aesthetic. They've got their own ideas. It's fast, it's intense, and it's lyrically rich, and shockingly, it's just as good as I've come to expect from Maruha, which is already a really high standard that they're setting. Alright, so now we're digging into our top 20 list here. At number 20, we have The Last Dinner Party. I went ahead and went with Beautiful Boy from them. I've previously described The Last Dinner Party's 2024 debut as the most beautiful, elegant album in pop and rock this year, and I will continue doubling down on that sentiment. And on said beautiful and elegant album, the aptly titled Beautiful Boy is probably the one I can say that the most for. The loud to quiet to loud type of progression this song takes on is so smooth and so harmonious, and all around sounds perfect. The instrumentation is sparkling, elegant, and gorgeous throughout, and the vocals paired with them are equally stunning. That's not all, even then, because of the lyrics on here. Of the lot, this might have been the hardest artist to pick just one song from. I think Feminine Urge and Nothing Matters are equally great picks. Honestly, for the moment that it had, maybe Nothing Matters was the right one to pick, so just gotta share the space between the two here, I guess. My pick is Beautiful Boy, that's my favorite, but it probably should go to Nothing Matters. We're gonna move on then to number 19. For this placement, we have Cemetery and Ghost Mountain with their reunion collaboration, Dark Harvest. Haunted Mound's run this year, and even Cemetery's run on his own, was one of very high highs and very low lows. The highest of those highs was Dark Harvest, in my opinion. This saw the reuniting again of Cemetery with Ghost Mountain, which we haven't seen in a very long time, and these two members were the original only two members and really what made the whole thing special in the first place. It feels like a honed, perfected version of something that would have landed on one of those earliest projects like Gravehouse. It brings me personal nostalgia of a time that feels much simpler, even though it was only about 5 years ago. It's also a revival of the original wave of Witch House, with this track in particular having some of the spookiest aesthetics they've dealt with in quite some time. This might be the best modern track revitalizing that sound. Next up here, we're going to move on to number 18. At this spot, we have Jack Name, Walking in the Park at Night. Jack Name's fabulous soundtracks got a perfect score from me and from my co-hosts this year, and that makes it feel a bit weird to put him this far down on the list, but I truly think Fabulous Soundtracks is an album best experienced as a front-to-back piece once again. If you were to pick one out though, I would go with Walking in the Park at Night. It's contender for both the scariest and catchiest song on the album, and I love the aesthetics that it uses. At this point, I've talked at length about Jack Name's uncanny, unsettling, but somehow also quite peaceful and psychedelic folk fusion sound, and I will continue to go on talking about it in the future as well, but for now, just know that the opener is the best place to start. So then we're going to move on to number 17. At this placement, we have Glass Beach, Comatose. Glass Beach got a huge boost in acclaim this year, widely speaking, but honestly, it still might not be enough. Their art rock odyssey, Plastic Death, comes to a close with this truly incredible 10-minute semi-closer. Between the length, the lo-fi, fuzzy production style, the emotional punch that it packs, it's probably the band's most challenging song. Somehow, it's possibly the easiest to appreciate as well, and it's for all the same reasons. Whether it's for the sound or the sentiment, it seems impossible to sit down with this one and not get anything from it. We then move on to number 16.
Check. Full moon rotating on the pinky. Half a roach packed with the sticky. These cats iffy.
Here at this spot, we have Bug Flesh by Jesse the Tree. After hearing Jesse's 2024 release Not Fade Away, it's been one of the albums that I have continuously come back to time and time again. Bug Flesh and tracks on the album like it are a big part of why I ended up doing so. He comes across as so smooth, so charismatic. Everything this guy says on a track, I end up liking. Jesse is truly a hidden gem within the underground rap scene, because all of those qualities and more are on display with Bug Flesh in particular. This song is easy to listen to, sonically satisfying, and backed by some really trippy and unique production from his frequent collaborator Andrew. That's all we got on that one. Let's move on to number 15.
Oh my drink, bitch.
Chained Up by Snow Strippers. Calling back very closely to the electronic fusion of Witch House originally coined by Crystal Castles, Snow Strippers feels like they're making the perfect revitalization of that sound. Chained Up is one of the strangest sounding but also catchiest and coolest tracks from them that came out in 2024. With such a prolific output, it felt difficult to choose just one in the last 2 years from them. 2024 saw a bit of a slowdown from them, only putting out one EP. This Night Killers Volume 2 project feels very consistently similar in sound, and it's a cold, sparkling sound that's equal parts poppy and psychedelic. I don't think anyone else is really doing it right now. Now we're going to be moving on to number 14.
I just seen my life in threes. I lived again.
At this placement, we have Gene Dawson, Play Dead. It feels like so far Gene Dawson has had a career trajectory somewhat in line with someone like Tyler the Creator on his last 4 album run at least. He dove into rock music a lot with his last album before this one, but Glimmer of God is a record that really can't be defined by one sound exactly at all. Even this song alone, Play Dead, can't be summarized by one genre at all. It starts on sort of an eerie, ominous, dark wave inspired section containing a sample flip that I absolutely love the sound of. As it continues, we somehow end up in this loud, aggressive, brutal rap section that's explosive and punchy in almost sort of a trap metal kind of way. The whole song is like a frigidly cold winter night, and the fast section at the end is like a blizzard coming through. I feel like Glimmer of God gave us so much to chew on, pick favorites from, and pick apart. Play Dead just ends up being my favorite here. We'll then be moving on to number 13. Storage by Sam LRC. Sam LRC is one of the more lesser known artists on this list, and I'm constantly blown away by that fact when I come back to this album. This song, and really this album as a whole, brings post-rock sounds reminiscent to that of Godspeed You, Black Emperor, with a unique twist. This album carries heavy, dense, emotional themes, and without actually laying down a single lyric, Storage manages to get that across. What it does contain vocally is a sample of a 70s anime film, which depicts a sheep desiring to become a wolf to be strong and scary as opposed to vulnerable. Strong and scary are 2 words you could easily describe this 12-minute behemoth of a track with. It's dense, heavy, and powerful in an oppressing sort of way, and for that reason, it ends up being my favorite highlight on her album, The Lonely Sinner. We will then move on to number 12.
She loves me not. I'll find you in another's eyes. The promise of another life, cool, but what's on the other side?
Here we have Mavi with The Giver. Mavi was a name I was unfamiliar with until this year, and I'm so glad I became much more familiar with him this year. The Shadowbox album this comes from as a whole, I'd argue to be an absolute masterpiece. And the masterpiece within a masterpiece here is The Giver. Immediately from its opening notes in the instrumental, I become fully invested in the track. It sounds just about beautiful but depressing enough to bring a tear to my eye before the lyrics even start. And once those lyrics do start, they're very deep and equally somber. The song is a quick one, but the vulnerability and even narrative ability in its quick impact is so impressive. Shadowbox as a whole has greatness as a result of the sum of its parts, but so many of those parts can be disassembled and looked at as nearly perfect or perfect on their own merit. Then we'll move on to number 11, last one before the top 10 here.
Loneliness empowers.
We have Violet Pony, The Wallflower Equation. I remember seeing this Violet Pony album popping up on Album of the Year on the week that it came out and receiving the fanfare that it did and just being pretty confused at what I was looking at. When I started reading comparisons to Swans among the discussion, I was even more confused, considering the aesthetics of it and just how much you wouldn't expect that. And when listening to this for the first time, the first, I want to say 4 songs left me pretty confused as to why anyone was making that comparison. But it's when we get to this dense, intense, progressive, emotional, and overwhelming track that it all starts to make sense. It's not even the album's biggest statement when considering Sludge, a song so lengthy, dynamic, and multi-phased it could be its own album. It's also not the album's most intense track. That would have to go to the downright disturbing Princess Cuckoo. What it is, however, is the album's most strong and powerful, sonically likable track when it comes to the more major, grander ones available here. It packs in some thoroughly intense sounds but manages to be punchy and satisfying in its intensity. The dark, heavy themes of the album also begin to show most on this track, right down to a narrative with characters you can follow along with. I've said it about this album before and I'll say it again, don't judge this book by its cover. It's probably different than you're expecting. Alright, let's get into the top 10. And at our number 10 spot, we have The Cure, I Can Never Say Goodbye. Something a bit more straightforward, but equally impactful, is what I'd call the best song on The Cure's 2024 comeback after a whole 16 years. Every song on here has this gigantic, impressive, instrumental opening, these dramatically deep sections of sound, and it doesn't fit on any track better than it does on this one. The lyrics here deal in vocalist Robert Smith's emotions surrounding the passing of his brother, and it's an incredibly touching moment. I remember this track clicking the most with me when I was outside and actual rain started right when the rain sound started in the song. It's a highly coincidental moment and one that I hope you also have sometime, coincidentally, I guess, because it was great. It was very cool. So that's all I've got on that one. Moving on to number 9. At this spot, we have Beneficium by Shushu. Shushu is a band that I'd say has one of the highest barriers to entry if we exclude very extremely harsh genres. But in 2024, we saw them get to their most accessible sound yet. On their latest album, Beneficium contends for the spot of the most accessible song on it, and even then this song is fucking wild. Here we have vocalist Jamie Stewart using their intense, unpredictable voice to portray lyrics that are hard to decipher, but so rich in imagery. That's all set over an instrumental that's progressive and experimental, but also just rocks. The big, catchy leading riff is so striking and alone makes this one of their most memorable songs. While there is a defined chorus to the track, that little lick there almost acts as the hook. The whole thing is sonically very ear-grabbing. That then takes us into the number 8 pick. Here I decided to go with Take Me Home by Knocked Loose. I've followed Knocked Loose for quite a while now, and this is easily their best piece of work yet. It's also the best thing to come out of metal this year in general, if you are to ask me. Really, any number of songs on that album could have ended up here. The ones that have consistently always stood out more to me are Blinding Faith and this one, so I decided to go ahead and give it to the deeper cut of the two. It's one of the most shockingly brutal and heavy tracks on the album, and I particularly love the shaky, unsettling percussive elements in the mix. The whole record is absolutely crushing and uncompromising, but if you take one out specifically to point at, it's gotta be this one for me. Alright, moving on to number 7.
Give up on being human.
Here we have Quadeca with You Tried That Thing Where You're Human. Out of the many great albums that came out this year, Quadeca's Scrapyard was easily one of the most diverse, meaning you could pick so many different songs here, and each one would be a wildly different vibe of a pick. I decided to go pretty far down from the depressed and slow end of the project, the farthest you can really go. Everything else on the album has a little bit more hopeful of a glimmer to it, and really it's the farthest down a depressing rabbit hole you can get to as far as any music I heard this year. It sounds like the vocals, especially during the beginning of the track, are delivered through a tearful, emotional breakdown of sorts. And the meaning, however you might want to interpret it in the lyrics, kind of makes it clear as to why. The whole way through, gradually more and more, it feels like the instrumental, especially the dissonant, unpredictable synth, are having a similar crisis and just kind of crumbling. It chills out in this possibly uncomfortable but inarguably raw for a decently long amount of the runtime here, but the way the song progresses is just incredible. Alright, time to move on to number 6, one away from the top 5.
I'll be lonely with these Grammys when it's all said and done. Come on.
Here Here we have Tyler, the Creator, with Darling I. Tyler's latest, Chromacopia, is another where you could really pick almost any song reasonably, and most of the songs here have incredibly varied sound to them, so it's pretty similar. Maybe I'm playing it safe here, but I decided to go with what I believe to be the most replayable and easily likable track on the album, Darling I. Reminds me a bit of the sweet poppy tunes Tyler has done a few times, such as the biggest hit he's done ever, See You Again, but it also has a bit more of an experimental and adventurous structure with some very creative production choices. It goes so far to very tastefully sample the snappy little bits of percussion from Drop It Like It's Hot. We see a great Tizo touchdown feature here, and wow, talk about another quick, astronomical, and impressive rise to stardom. It's so wild seeing him not on one but two Tyler, the Creator albums now, but his contributions make this already fun and catchy track even more likable. A layer deeper than the sound, the concept of the track is actually pretty creative here, focusing on the topic of polyamory rather than a more traditional monogamous love song. The line on here that closes off the verse, "Nobody could fulfill me like this music shit does, so I'll be lonely with these Grammys when it's all said and done," is one of my favorite Tyler, the Creator moments just ever in general. The way it hits in the song is perfect. But that's our last one before the top 5, so let's rip right on into it with our number 5 pick. We've got Adrian Lenker, Vampire Empire. Last year we saw the long-anticipated release of this song under the Big Thief name, and while it was certainly well received, it disappointed some fans by having differences in the lyrics and some differences in the sound from the original teased version. Maybe I'm on the wrong side of history here, but I can totally get the disappointment after hearing both versions side by side. The big drums and more polished orchestration of the Big Thief version is certainly cool, but this raw and acoustic version hits me so much harder on an emotional level, and it's no nonsense straightforwardness. Maybe it's not that big of a deal in reality, but I think even the original lyrics have just a better flow to them. The lyrics here are beautiful, and I think they deserve their smoothest rendition. This is easily the simplest and most straightforward song you'll find here in my top 10, but the simplicity of it is what makes it beautiful. Then next we'll move on to the number 4 pick. Here we have Lil Yachty and James Blake with their song Twice. Don't get me wrong, Bad Cameo had its moment a little bit this year, but inevitably I think it ended up pretty underrated, and the most underrated song from this underrated album is Twice. Lil Yachty's transition into growingly more and more mediocre trap music, suddenly into more psychedelic and experimental forms of music entirely, has been a really cool switch up, a really great little redemption arc. And what's even better is how this latest project and just his psychedelic sounds in general feel like such a great pairing for James Blake to collaborate with him on. He does fantastically on this song. I've said plenty of times before, and even just earlier in this video, that the more melodic and poppy forms of rap and oftentimes R&B is just an immediate way to get me to like a song more than I ever would. Taking Yachty to his most poppy, melodic, and catchy, immediately likable spot, and then making a bit more of a trippy and entrancing sound is exactly what Twice does. Even that spoken section at the end there could have so easily come across as corny to me, but instead it rings as impactful and sweet. While the interpretation could go more than one way depending on how you want to look at it, I will go ahead and call this best love song of 2024. Let's move on to the top 3 with our number 3 pick.
How you feel? It's so confusing sometimes to be a girl.
Charlie XCX, Girl So Confusing, featuring Lorde on the remix. Charlie XCX's Brat made such a huge and iconic splash in the world of pop music this year, and really the world of general culture, transcending music entirely. This album is pretty much fantastic through and through, and immediately one of the tracks that made me come to that conclusion and stood out to me was Girl So Confusing, the original version of the track. The spacey, bubbly, ethereal instrumentation with snappy, crisp percussion already hits in an immediately fun and nostalgic way. What really sends it to a best territory is the surprisingly vulnerable and heartfelt lyrics from Charlie here. One of a handful on Brat, more and more as the album goes along, that have that in common. It shows Charlie detailing her connection with an acquaintance who's a fellow musician, and the subtle, complicated undertones of negative feelings between the two of them despite being friendly and cordial in person. This sparked discussion that the song might not entirely be fictional, especially with certain references leading fans to believe that it might be in reference to Lorde, who is of course featured on the remix that this all led up to. That story needs to be emphasized to show just how much of a moment this was. They said the internet would go crazy right on the song, and the internet most certainly did, with this being a wide consensus pick for a 2024 favorite. It turned out what was already a great song from one of the year's best albums turns into an incredibly wholesome moment of the two opening up about these complicated undertones in their connections in the past. This track isn't just one of the best songs of the year, but it's one of the best moments of the year. It shows a rekindling and or burying of the hatchet between two people. It's so wholesome. It's so heartfelt. You love to see it. It's such a great little track, and it was even before the remix. So that's what gets it so high up on the list here. Alright, we got two left. Let's get into the number 2 pick.
Still completely unknown, like the German Black Forest. Of you I know nothing.
Jordi Griep, The Magician. Black Midi have been one of my favorite bands in the recent era for just about as long as they made music, originally being a fan of Schlagenheim when it came out. Seeing them suddenly break up was absolutely heartbreaking when it happened, especially when songs like Speedway and Slow were top contenders for my best songs lists of the years that those songs came out. And a result that I never could have predicted, this song from the former band's own Jordi Griep might be better than any of my favorite Black Midi songs. In fact, this dramatically dynamic, lavish, grandiose, 12-minute introspective lamentation on the topic of a slowly broken relationship is one of the best songs I've ever heard. It's a song that sounds fitting to be the climax of an award-winning theater musical, and given the rock opera-like narrative of the album and the warm reception from critics and fans alike, it might as well be exactly that. The instrumentation here manages to balance noisiness with elegance in a way that's arguably never been done before. Truly gives me chills at every twist and turn almost every time I've come back to this song. It's a little bit of a harder one to come back to because of the length and the huge statement that it is, but I've come back to it more than any other song of this type of length. It's so incredibly impressive what Griep was able to pull off this year with the new sound, and this album has the perfect closing act between this song and the one that follows it. It's truly shocking to me that it's been such a great year for music that this actually gets passed up by another pick. So moving on to our number 1 for 2024.
I see dead people. Certified lover boys, certified pedophiles. What? That fuck 'em up.
And at number 1 we have Kendrick Lamar's Not Like Us. Because of course we do. Kendrick's career all the way back from his original debut album is inarguably impressive, but even that in mind, 2024 has got to be his biggest year ever. Despite all of the already classic albums that he's dropped in the 2010s and even the 2020s to an extent. Not Like Us is a big reason why I still think that to be the case. Through one of the catchiest performances possible in rap music, Kendrick here cleverly, impactfully, absolutely decimated Drake in the biggest rap beef of the century thus far. So much so that it's done legitimate damage to Drake's career, as stated by a lawsuit that he recently filed. That says a lot, considering that Drake's career was at such a high, and he's been on top of the world for years now. That's not to mention just how great the bouncy, fun, hard-hitting beat here is from Mustard. Even that looks symbolic at this point with how much Kendrick saw to uplift and revitalize the West Coast hip-hop scene with his following GNX album that came later this year. Even that album alone had multiple songs that could have ended up here, such as Gloria, TV Off, and Hey Now. If Not Like Us wasn't the moment that it was, all of those would have been contenders for my top spot. The absolute landmark moment in history this song was also makes it land above his other disses against Drake. I originally had this spot as like Not Like Us / Meet the Grams because I feel like you can't really have one without the other, but you didn't have people constantly bumping Meet the Grams. Really though, my number one spot isn't just Not Like Us, but it's Kendrick's victory in the biggest rap beef in 2 or more decades, and the subsequent victory laps that have come with it. So with that, we're going to say goodbye to another piece of 2024 history. Again, I do want to mention we have podcast episodes out on the best and worst music of 2024. We talk about songs there, we talk about albums there. I have my co-host Micah there, so it's a little bit of a different format that will hopefully interest you to some extent. And coming up, I'm also planning on doing a worst albums list and a best albums list to close the year off. It would be greatly appreciated if you could drop a like on the video if you did like what you saw here today, and it would also be appreciated if you could subscribe to the channel for more music related content coming your way. But that is just about going to wrap it up for this one, and I will see you in the next video.